Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is Marty Lecletter. I'm your host today and your sole presenter. Many of you are probably familiar with my name, being associated with this product. I am the product manager for Domino Vault, and it's my honor to take you through an exciting agenda today. We're going to dive into some of the features that are in the latest release, and we're going to take a look at how you can put them into action. I'm going to give you some advice on some techniques that I've used that I would like to share with you, some best practices. And we're also going to take a look at, towards the tail end of this presentation, some interesting application patterns. And the goal there really is to enlighten you as to what you can potentially do with this product. So let's jump right in. First off, there is a file which you can find in the notes on the right in this meeting, and it's a PDF. These charts are in there, and these links will take you to different files which I'm going to demo today. So these are Vault applications which we're going to take a look at. The first three assume that there's information in the directory, names.nsf. We're going to look up information about people and do some things with workflow. Of course, I built them using my directory. So, your directory may have different information in it. So just keep that in mind. They will work, but as we get into this, you'll see where there might be some questions or issues with them. And then the last one is just completely standalone. So that'll work anywhere. So the first topic is directory services. So in Vault 101, we ship out of the box directory services. And I'd have to say this is probably one of the most useful features I found in the product. What can you do with it? Well, you can get information on who the current user is. I mean, that's important. You want somebody to log into an app and you want to know who they are. You want to display their name, perhaps their email. If it's a workflow app, you probably want to know who they work for. If it's a workflow with multiple levels, well, you probably want to know who the manager's manager is, and so forth and so on. Or perhaps you're doing some application where what you want to do is assign somebody to an item that is in your task list. Well, how do I find somebody? So there's many reasons why we might want to go to names.nsf and get information on people. So let's take a look at some of the more common scenarios. And I'm going to start off with the application on users. And we're going to first address this question on, well, who is filling out the form? How can we address this in the app? So what I want to do is jump from the charts to demo and back and forth to kind of illustrate what we're doing here. So I have this app here, users and directory services. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into edit mode. We'll demo everything from there. And you can see on this page, I've got display name and internet email. So there is a service on the on show event on display name. It could be on the form on show, the page on show, in this case, the display name on show. And what I've done here is a couple of things. The first is I'm calling a service, and that service is this one right here, get user by identifier. So if we go into that service, you can see what I'm doing is I'm passing the current user. So it knows who I am. See, if you look up here in the upper right, you can see I'm admin, right? So I've obviously logged in. I'm in design mode. It knows who I am. I'm current user. I pass that, and then what I can do is get anything about that current user out of the address book. So I'm going to get the internet address and the display name in this case, and what I'm going to do is map them into these two different fields, right? So real simple stuff. Now, the other thing that I've done here is, in some cases, you don't only want to know who the current user is, but perhaps you want to know who is initiating this request. So what I want to do is grab the current user, but only in the start stage, because once it goes on for approval, I don't want this field to populate with the manager's name. I just want to know who the initiator is, who has requested this. So what I've done is, instead of just calling this outright in this mode, I've decided to wrap this in an if statement, right? And it's really easy to do this. I'll just recreate it for you. So I can say if, and this will give you an idea of some of the new features in the JavaScript editor. So I just typed the bo dot, and you see there's get current stage, right? And then I could say equals, and what I want to do is get a stage. So the stage I want to start. So you can see what I'm doing is using this object picker and this little pop-up to do all the work for me. So there's my if statement. And then I want to call a service. Oh, I can't remember the JavaScript function for calling a service. Well, I just hit Control space here a couple of times on my Mac. Oh, there's call a service. And then I can double click into this, and then I can use the object picker and then go find the service that I want to call, and it's that one right there. So easy to do. Leverage the capabilities that are in this JavaScript editor, and you can build that out there. So now this will just get the initiator, right? And of course we can preview this, and you can see that it works. Yeah, I'm admin, but in this name and address book, and I'll show you the name and address book here quickly. I've got a Docker setup, and this happens to actually be the Docker setup that you can download from the product download site in FlexNet, and it has a sample organization called Renovations. I added a few more names in here for workflow purposes, which we'll get into later, but this is my directory that I'm accessing here, so you can see the records that it's pulling up. So let's go on with the next scenario. So that's pretty simple stuff. The next scenario that I want to get into here is, I can't remember the exact spelling of a name. So this is where perhaps I want to pick somebody out of the directory and assign them to a task. All right, so in the scenario that I have is I want to assign a case investigator to some case that we're opening up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you type in one character you want, and I'm going to go find what I can out of the directory, and then I'm going to put it into this field called case investigator return from search, and then I'm going to push it into the case investigator field. But I'm only going to call this service if the value here in case investigator doesn't equal what is returned and is not blank. So you can see if item get value is not blank, and if it's not this, then call the service, right? So it's kind of a clever loop here, and probably the best way to appreciate this is to go back to the demo. And what we'll do is we'll go to the next page, and let's say I want to type in T, and I know, oh, Ted, or maybe I want to type in A. Oh, there's admin, but maybe it's A and D. Oh, there's Andrew. So you can see what it's doing is the on change here is going to the directory, it's returning something here, and it's pushing it into this. And of course, when it pushes it into this, it doesn't call the service again because it's got that if statement there. But it gives you a very nice behavior where you can just type whatever you want in, and you can find the person in the directory. All right, so a simple little technique. And then if we take a look at the code here, This is what I showed in the PowerPoint chart. You can see the if statement, right? Only call this if it doesn't equal to what's returned, or if it's not blank. Right, so that's one piece of JavaScript, and then there's another piece of JavaScript that says when this changes, just push this value into this field. Right, and so that's all that's being done there, just those lines of JavaScript, and that gives you a very nice behavior. It's a trick that the product is incredible. It's got such great flexibility. If you kind of figure out how you want it to work, and you've got something that really works well, you can reuse it in application after application after application. So that's a technique that I thought I would share. Now there is one other technique. Oh, sorry, wrong browser. One other technique that I wanted to share, which is related to this search service. So I'm searching the directory. What's interesting about the search service in the directory, and this is also true with search services in Domino, which we're going to look at later, is that you can get a single record back, or you can get multiple. It's up to you. So if you look at the output, which you can grab and assign to your application, you'll get single and array options. So in this case, I'm going to use the array option. So I've got an on-change event here. And what it's doing is it's pushing all the results in here. Where before I would have gotten just admin, right, the single. And then I can pick this and pop it in there, or pick that. Right. And the reason I didn't want to get into a lot of detail on this is because this is kind of the path that we're going with the name picker, which you're going to see in the next release. So we're just going to give you a way that you can have a type ahead and easily, see all the different options and then pick them. So, more to come in another release, which, perhaps you use some of these techniques, some of these you don't. All right, so that's those examples there. Let's move on. Dynamic role assignment. So the basic question that this capability answers is, how do I build an application, an approval application, where it works for everybody in the organization? Well, you have to make it dynamic. Otherwise, you've got to hardwire who the people are that are approving things. All right, so how exactly does this work? All right, we're going to get into the details on this, because it's a topic that even with some more seasoned developers, there is a bit of confusion. So let's well, I'll stick with the slides. Let's go forward and talk about the basic concepts first. All right, so what you want to do is create an app, and you want a stage in the app where somebody needs to approve the request, or whatever the nature of the workflow app is. But it's a stage where you want somebody to be assigned to it, right? So in this case, I've got an approval stage, and I want to assign somebody to that approval stage, to a role that's associated with that approval stage, to be more precise. So the next thing I would do is define a role, and I want to define the role as open. All right, so we'll take a look at this in the demo. And then for that role, so you'll get in the Access tab a listing of the different stages, and then you can see the different roles. And what you do is you specify the privileges for each role in each stage. So in this case, I have an approval stage, and I have the approver open role, which I defined. And of course, if you're going to approve something, you want update privileges. You want to actually be able to save that record and add any comments if necessary. So those are the three key items when it comes to setting up the stage in the access and role privileges. The next thing you're going to do is, in the action, when the user is submitting the request, what you want to do is have an activity And you can see the activities here are, you've got 3 choices: send an email, call a service, or assign users. So in this case, what we want to do is assign users by service call. So this is the actual dynamic role assignment that we're going to make here. And when you go find your user, what you're able to do is then map them into an open role. Right? And since we defined approver as an open role, it shows up here. So I would define whoever it is that I find through the search or retrieve into this open role. Right? So in this case, we're going to take a look at a demo, which is going against the directory. But this assignment can come from any service. It could be any service. It could be one or it could be multiple people. Perhaps you want to assign multiple people on a team to a task which has come in for review, as an example. I have an example that I created for our marketing organization where there's various teams of people that work on different types of marketing projects. And when a request comes in, it goes to the team to be assigned. Right? So we have multiple people which get assigned dynamically to a request. And then once you have the assignment, once you've made that, well, then you can also send a notification, and you send the notification to the role. Right? So let's take a look at this in action. And again, the sample app is out there, and it's been greatly simplified so that all we're looking at is the relevant topics here, which have to do with dynamic role assignment. So we'll look at this in edit mode, and you can see that it's just a simple form. If I preview this, I'm making a couple of directory calls. Right. Actually, I'm making one. I'm finding out who the current user is in the manager. So in this case, this is part of my person record. So it's coming back. Right. If the organizational structure of the manager is not in that person record, well, perhaps there's another source where you can pull that in. But you need, when you're doing dynamic role assignment, you need to be able to make a service call and find out who people are. Right, which is why we get into the directory services first. So we know that Andrew is the manager. And then over here in stages on defined roles, you can see that in addition to the 3 which I get by default, I have this 4th one which I created called approver. It's open. So what that means is that there's no explicit assignments here. There's no members explicitly assigned. And then I've got the different stages. In this case, here's the approval stage, and I'm saying the approver can update. All right. So then when we go to stages, under the submit button, the person that submits this request, here you see the assignment. All right. So what I'm going to do is take the manager name. I'm sending that to the directory service that we looked at earlier, and then I'm getting back the internet email address, and I'm assigning that to the member role, as a member to the approval role, that open role that we created. And the second thing I'm doing here is sending a notification. So the notification can then go to the role, all right? So those are the pieces that tie all that together, right? And it's fairly simple, right? Now let's move back to the presentation. Let's make things a little bit more complicated. Let's say that there's multiple levels which might be needed. So the scenario here is I'm making a request. If it's less than $10,000, 1 level. If it's greater than 10,000 but less than 50,000, 2 levels. Greater than or equal to 50,000, 3 levels. All right. So this is probably fairly common. And I like to think of this as dynamic workflow. I don't necessarily know how many approval levels are needed. So how do we address this? So the app that we looked at, I've got another version of it where I've built this dynamic workflow into it. And what I've done is I've added 3 submit buttons to the start stage. And each submit button goes to a different stage. So the first submit button, that's for one level of approval. If there's only one level of approval, it's going to go to the final approval stage and then end. If there's 2 levels, then it's going to go to level 2. So we'll get a level 2 approver and then a final approver, and so forth and so on. Right. So what I'm doing is ending always at final approval for that last approver, but I'm moving forward based on how many are required. So I've got the ability to go 1, 2, 3 final for 3 levels, or just final for 1 level, or level 2 and final for 2 levels. Right. And then on the buttons themselves, I have a rule. So I'm figuring out how many levels are required. I've got a field in the form, and then I'm just setting a rule on which button to show. Right. And the way I'm figuring out how many levels are required is I have a little bit of JavaScript on the amount field, and it's just a simple test. If it's less than 10,000, well, then it's 1. If it's between 10,000 and 50,000, then it's 2. Greater than 50,000, then it's 3. Right, so let's take a look at this. We'll go back over here. Let's find the dynamic workflow. Here it is, dynamic workflow. I'm gonna first do is just bring this up, and we'll run it. And I'm gonna run it in view data. And the reason I'm gonna run it in view data is so you can see the stages as they change. So I'll launch the form, and we're just going to request this thing, and the amount is going to be, let's say, 50,000. All right, so there is a little bit of JavaScript that says, okay, it's levels 3. All right, and it's telling me next approver is Andrew. So the next approver is always going to be your first line manager in all cases. All right, if I change this to $10,000, you can see it's levels 2. We'll go back to 50,000 level 3. We'll submit this. I'll come over here. You see it's at level 1. So it's going to go through all the levels because there's that many that are required. So that was the submission. It's at level 1. Andrew is the approver. Right. Close these so I don't get a million open. Now it's at level 2. So when I open it here, I can see that Rajesh is the approver. And then I'll open it again. It's in final approval, and we see that Darren is the approver. All right. So it's always going to adjust based on how many levels are there. Right. So a little bit of JavaScript and some creativity with using the stages and the rules. Now there's one other challenge which is interesting with this application, and that is I need to keep track of the current level and the next approver. Now, if there's one level, I know the next approver. If I'm in the final approval stage, I know, or level 2, and the next approver is the final approver, and I know, the final approver. But there's a little bit of JavaScript here, and what I'm doing is I'm just keeping track of these 3 variables. So the levels required, which we determine that up front, and then the current level, and then the next approver. So these simply just say, okay, if I'm at level 2, if 2 levels are required and the current level is 1, then move the current level to new current level, which is current level plus 1, and go get the second manager, and so forth and so on. So it may look scary, but this is actually fairly simple. All right, so let's go back and we'll take a look at this in the app. And you can see here in the code, I've got this on the before save. So this is exactly where that is. And that's how it knows who next. It's always going to put the next approver here. And this is where you would tie the next approver to the dynamic role assignment. Right, so for each stage, I'm always going to that field and then doing a search, and then that result becomes the person that's assigned. All right. Now, to make things even a little bit more interesting, if you think about a single approval step, this probably isn't a question, because Volt keeps track of who created a record, when it was created, as well as who last updated the record and when it was last updated. But if I have more than 2 people updating the record, how do I see the approval history? Well, the answer is right out to a log. So one more interesting twist on this. Let's go back to this app. And you can see I've got a second form in the app. It's called Approval Log. It's just got 3 fields in it, right? And if you looked closely at this code on the before save, what I'm doing is I'm calling a service and then setting the level in the next approver. All right, so in this is the service which writes out to the log. All right, so it's just a simple create service. So if I come over here and look at these services, you can see this is the create service, and it's just pushing the request ID, the approver, and the level into this log. All right, so when I did this approval here, so I went through all 3 levels, and it's finally an end. If I look, and I'll refresh this, if I look at the approval log, you can see for this request, here's the log. So I have this history that's here. This is a test I did earlier. So that's another technique, and you've got this example. These are practical, real world type patterns that you're going to want to put into workflow. How do you get workflow in this product to work for your scenario? So hopefully that advice helps. Now let's move on with the content, and we'll go to the next topic. So here's just the picture of the workflow audit log call going out, and the mapping on the output, or the inputs to the log. Now I'm going to talk about another feature which is in 101, which is really incredibly powerful, and there's quite a bit to it, and it can be somewhat confusing. So if you look at 101, it's got the ability to read information from a Domino database. And it can read virtually just about anything from a Domino database, and there's really 4 different types of calls that it can make. All right. The first one is, I just want to get a view. I want to get what I see in the view, and I want a listing of it. All right, so that's an array that comes back. As well as with number 2 and number 3, these are all arrays. But the interesting thing, like with the directory search, you can get either the first instance or you can get the complete list. All right, so you've got that option. So there's a list view, and then there's list view categories. All right, so a view may have certain categories. I just want to get the category names, and I find that incredibly useful for doing pre-population of, let's say, a drop-down or maybe a select one. Right, so I just want the category names, put them in there. Right, and then find list entries. So that's really a search. I want to find the view list entries that meet a certain criteria. All right, and then there's finally get document by unique ID, and this is where I'd actually get the underlying document and anything from it. So let's take a look at the first 3 of these. And before we do that, I'm going to show you the database. So this is the database that I'm going against. This is a Domino database, and I've got sales and cost information in here. All right, so different product segments, countries, and I've got views and categories by product segment, discount band, etc. All right, so lots of useful data in there. Let's go over to Volt. We'll close these things down. And let's go to Domino Data Access. So this application has not yet been deployed. I'll bring it up in edit mode. And I've actually numbered the different techniques. So the first one is list view. So in this case, it's a button, and the button has a call, and it's a list view service call to that Domino database. So you can see financial sample, that's the one I picked. List view entries is the service operation. And here it's giving you the ability to sort by column. So if you want to have this come over sorted, and you have the direction of the sort, ascending or descending, and it's telling you the format that the data is coming across. And you can make some changes to this if you want. So perhaps, instead of a timestamp, maybe you want to have it come over as a date, because that's easier to map into what you have in your table. So there's some tweaks there that you can make. On the inputs, you're really limited. The idea is to get the entire view listing, and the inputs have to do with how many records do you see on a page, and how many pages do you want on a particular page. I'm just going to say let's go with 1,000 on a page, and then you grab all of the items in that view. So you can see I've got date, country, product segment, etc. And I'm pulling them from the array options here across. All right, so that's the view. So let's go and we'll preview this. You can see I push the button, and it just pushes them all into there. All right, so let's go to the next one. List views by category. So this select one has an on show event, and the on show event does this list view categories. So when the select one appears, it goes over to that Domino database, and it says, get me the categories and discount band. All right, and I'm simply just mapping the categories to the saved value and displayed value. So it's very similar to what I would do with a drop down, but in this case it's just a select one. So when I preview this, you might have noticed before, you can see I got high, low, medium, none. So these are the categories of discount bands that are out there. All right, and then I took that a step further. I said, okay, now that I've got the categories, when I change it, let's find a view entry. And what I want to do is find a view entry where it's the discount band that I'm selecting. All right, so I selected discount band, that's the input, and then I'm getting the records to push into the table. So this is the find view entries. All right, so if we take a look at this in action, I can click this here, and I've got 160. So I've got this is a table count, and this is the table's table average, table sum. These are out of the box functions that you can easily put in place for any table. And here I can see 240 with medium, and no discounting. We only had 53, so there's a lot of discounting going on. All right. Now, the last Domino function that I want to show you, getting Domino data, is getting a specific document. So in this case, these are entries from a view. So these are ones with no discounting that are showing up here. One hint here is you don't have to display everything that's in view in the table. So this table actually has a UID which has been put into it. And if I click on this record or this record, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the values in that record, and I'm pushing them into other fields, right? So I'm pushing the UID over here, and I'm also pushing some values into a table which is down below, right? So if I look, oh, I've got it hidden, but it's there. So I'm pushing the values into this table, and then this is just echo text. So I'm just echoing these values as they change. So I click on this, it pushes values there, and it pushes the value over here. The code that does that, well, I use this in the selecting a name from the results of a directory before. And this is a piece of JavaScript, a technique that I use over and over and over again. What you want to do is get the selection of the row. So you simply just declare a variable as what's selected. So this is the function item get selection. And the reason you put this in here, if selected equals null return, is you don't want it to do anything if you click the column head for sort. You know, so I may click on the table, but not a row. So this will nullify that. If I don't have anything, then, you know, just return. Otherwise, let's get the UID value from the table and push that into the one that's on the form. So it's a fairly simple stuff. But what that allows me to do is specify an onChange event here. And the onChange event here is calling the service to get the actual document, the Domino document. So read a single document from sales record, and then the input is the UID. All right, so the way this works, again, is I click on this, it gets this, this calls, I might have misspoke, this calls a service which then populates these, which then echo there. So it all happens in a blink of an eye and works incredibly well. So, you know, different techniques and different sort of use cases for the Domino services. Hopefully this little example here, you know, puts things in context. Now, I didn't want to do anything elaborate here because I wanted to keep it simple and focus on the topics at hand, but I did do something which is a little bit more refined. You know, perhaps the scenario here is I want to see all the sales records, and then you know, I've got it showing over here. I've hidden some things, and I've got a little graph over here which is showing me the sales and the cost, so I can get an idea of the margin. And maybe I want to take a look at the highly discounted items. Maybe I'm going to sort by country. And I see I've got a bunch in here from Canada. You know, maybe this one, oh, this one's not profitable. I can see that the costs are higher than the sales. Maybe we shouldn't do so much discounting. You know, how about the ones with no discount? Well, that looks a lot healthier. So, you know, real simple thing to build on top of some data that's out there, and, you know, somewhat of a practical example. I would share this, but I've got to share the source. You know, if I find a way to do that, I'm glad to share it. So let's go on with the topics. You know, this is a technique which I encourage you to really understand and learn if you haven't already, and it's the idea of getting a selection from a table and then doing something with that value from the table. So the first tip is you can put things in the table like the UID and not show it, and then this piece of JavaScript. All right, let's move on to the next topic, which is the PDF fill service. And this feature is very useful when you need a document, a record. I mean, if you think about Volt, what you're creating is a web application, and the presentation and the data really are separate. If I need the presentation and the data encapsulated into a document, you know, PDFs are a good way to go. So this will take information from your application, push it into a template, right? Create a new instance of that template and push it into that PDF, and then save the PDF, the filled PDF, right? And you can save it locally, which is the default. You can also save it as an attachment to the submission record, or you can save it in a specific file location, right? So let's take a look at an example. We'll go back here and find PDF. So here it is. So I built this simple little application, and I have this table pre-populating with values, and I could put in, you know, thing 4 if I want to, and maybe there's 66 of those, and there's a price of $6 for that. I'm just doing some math. Okay, so I got something new in there. So, you know, a main form with some values, and then I've got a table which can have any number of records. I submit this. There's the filled PDF, and it's attached, right? So what did I actually do there? I did the fill service. I saved it as an attachment, and I'm also displaying the form in the next stage. So that form was actually saved and submitted, and I'm just displaying it next stage, so you don't even notice. So there was a post event there that happened. So if we take a look at this, all right. First we'll go to settings, and you can see under files, this is the template, right? So a simple invoice template. And because that template is there and it's a fillable PDF, what I can do is add a service and use that file. You come under here, fillable PDF, you see that it shows up there, right? And then I simply just take the items from the form that I want to push in, and I push them into the template, right? Now, I'm going to lose those because I actually changed something there. Let's go back here. So that's a pre-pop service, and then of course you have an event that fills it. So in this particular case, the event that's filling it is the submit event, right? This is the actual service I'm using. So this is the submit event here. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about create it as an attachment. All right. So if you want the create as an attachment, what you have to do, and then I'll delete this and redo it so you understand this, is you highlight this, and then you come over to input assignments, and there's this notion of passing a constant to an input parameter. So in this case, I simply want to say true. All right, and because that now is set to true, you see it shows up here, it knows to create as an attachment. Now, the other piece to this is it returns, when it's created as an attachment, it returns an output, the filled PDF. So then the question becomes, well, what do you want to do with that filled PDF? You then map it to an attachment item in your form. Where do we want to save this? I'm going to save it here, right? So those are the two pieces for save as an attachment, right? And we'll back out of all this. All right. But there's one other interesting piece of this. You know, if I take a look at this template here, I've got a table, right? So these are individual items. This is really an array. How do I map items from a Vault table to a PDF table? All right, and this is really the second major tip of this topic. And we'll refer to the charts to go over this. So this is the, map the constant as true to create an attachment on the input, and then map the output of PDF to the attachment. But on tables, so how does Vault look at the PDF and say, oh, that's an array? The reality is that a fillable PDF doesn't really know what an array is. There's no notion of an array. Everything is just a field on a flat structure in a fillable PDF. The answer to that is the naming convention that you need to use for the fields in the fillable PDF table. All right, so if you name the fields in your fillable PDF table according to this convention, where you get the table row, but then the table column name, and these are double underscores, and then the column name and the row name, Vault will look at that and go, oh, it's an array. So if I go back to that service, we'll go over here, and yes, it was under here, under the submission event. And if I take a look at the inputs, because the table was named a certain way, Vault is looking at it and saying that PDF, oh, that's a table. So I just have to map these three things, and then it repeats it. All right, so it's a little bit tricky, but very powerful. And the key is to understand the naming conventions. Now, that PDF template I actually created in Adobe Acrobat, and this is a screenshot of working in Adobe Acrobat, and you can see how you've got this ability to lay out the form and the fields, and then you can give the fields different names. And here I've got the names in the table, conforming to the naming conventions as prescribed. All right, so that's the magic that works there. All right, now, I understand there's other tools too that you can use to create and edit fillable PDF templates. OpenOffice is another one. All right, so those are some tips on some of the new features that are in 101. Going a little bit deeper in some more practical application advice than you typically see in the the brand new market launch of the product. So hopefully those are of value. The next set of items that I want to talk about are some interesting application patterns. So I've been building applications for quite a few years in the product. I suppose I'm somewhat unique as a product manager in that I actually build applications in the product. I had a request recently where somebody wanted to automate the software quality process inside the company. And the way it works is that you have a person that puts together a plan. And the plan has different line items in it. And each line item belongs to a different stakeholder. And when you're putting the plan in place, you need to make sure that the stakeholders can contribute and that you're able to track the contributions. So we have a form, and the form lets you put together this plan. There's a table for the different line items. And when I save this plan or submit this plan, what it does is it creates new documents in a second application, which has the stakeholder documents in it. So by simply creating and publishing this plan, I do an auto generation of all the stakeholder documents and an auto notification to who those stakeholders are. And these stakeholder documents each have their own workflow associated with them. So the stakeholders are going to go through, they're going to work their piece of the plan. It's going to be approved at some point, and there's a dashboard which allows you then to get a view into the progress of all the different pieces of the plan and how it's coming together. So it's an interesting pattern, and I've seen this before. There was another application that I helped create where it was a retail organization, and headquarters put together promotional plans. And the promotional plans would go out to all the different stores. And then the stores would have to execute the promotional plans. But of course, headquarters wanted to know, well, where are the stores at? Have they executed the plan? Are they in process? Have they even started? So it's the same exact pattern. So I'll show you this application. And this application is one of the sample applications that I published. Right? It's the benefit of jumping in and volunteering to build things is you're able to build sample applications. So we'll take a look at, where is it? Oh, software quality, right there in front of me. So we'll launch this, and there's 3 different forms in here. So the first one is the dashboard that I put together. So there's no data behind this, it's just purely UI. And then there's the plan application, and then there's a stakeholder application. All right, so the plan has got a data store, and of course the stakeholder has got a data store. So here I can see 2 different plans which I have in play. So the first one is product A, next one's product D. And product D is in draft, so it hasn't been published to stakeholders yet. Product A has been published, and I can see that people are working on their pieces. I can open this plan, and I've used a technique here to bring the document up in a modal. All right, so this is the actual plan document I'm looking at. Now I can see the different pieces, all right, and look at that. And then I can come over here and I can look at the stakeholders, the forms, each one that is being worked there. All right, and get a view into the details of that. All right, so fairly simple stuff, but you know, the magic of this product is when you think about the flexibility and how it can be applied to business problems. Sometimes the genius is in, you know, that approach to dealing with the problem. So you can see all the different databases that I have here. These are simply just lookup databases. So I've got the areas, the metrics, the products, the different sort of tests. These are all dynamically being pulled into options. All right, we'll take a look at another pattern, which is somewhat similar. And this is, again, one that I had a hand in building. And this had to do with creating a case. And in this particular case, cases had different contexts associated with them. So the scenario here is it's a health department, and they get a record from a lab every week on who's tested positive, and they have to open up a case for each person in their county that is tested positive, and then they have to record information about that person, the person who you know represents the case, as well as all the contacts that have been involved with that person. So one of the questions was, well, why am I storing the contacts in a different form, a different database? Well, one of the reasons is, let's say I'm opening up a case. Wouldn't it be interesting to know if this person that I'm opening a case for was a contact in another case? Well, I can do that. So, you know, a similar pattern. I'll take a look at this up quickly. Again, I've got a dashboard, and I can see different cases that are open. I can open a selected case. I'm using the modal technique, and I can see different contacts in this case. So in this case, maybe I want to open up this contact for the case. Maybe you want to change a value. It was really the 16th. Could change some other information, and I see that you know, things would change here. I can add a new contact. Right, but that is information coming from a different source. It's tracked in a separate database, and it's all being pulled together here. All right, so some interesting application patterns.